My father has flirted with every woman I have ever loved, and somehow, he still believes he is the victim in all of this. I'm Ryan. I'm 26, and for the last 8 years, I have watched my dad ruin every relationship I try to build before it even gets a real chance. I used to think it was a coincidence. Then I thought maybe I was picking the wrong women. It took me a long time to understand that the problem was never them. The problem walks into every family dinner wearing cologne that costs more than my rent. My father, Daniel, is 54 years old and works as a relationship coach. Yes, you read that right. He built an entire career telling other men how to be better partners, better fathers, better versions of themselves. He has a podcast, a small following online, and a book with his face on the cover, arms crossed, wearing a shirt that is always one button too open. People pay him to fix their marriages, while his own son cannot keep a girlfriend longer than 4 months. It started so slowly that I did not notice it at first. Whenever I brought a woman home, my dad would turn into a completely different version of himself. Warmer, funnier, endlessly attentive. He would remember small details about her life that I had barely mentioned once. He would compliment her in ways that felt just a little too personal, a little too long, a little too much. At first, I told myself he was just being social. My dad has always loved being the center of attention. But slowly, I started noticing a pattern that made my stomach turn. The clearest example happened with Sophia. She taught kindergarten near my apartment, and she was kind in a quiet, steady way that made me feel calm whenever I was around her. We had been together for almost 5 months when I finally brought her to my dad's house for dinner. The moment she walked in, I watched something shift in his eyes, like a switch had been flipped. He hugged her a little too tightly, told her she had the kind of smile that could change a man's whole outlook on life. Sophia laughed it off politely, but I caught the confusion on her face. Throughout dinner, my dad barely looked at me. He asked Sophia about her childhood, her dreams, the reasons behind every choice she had made. He leaned in when she spoke. He refilled her glass before she even noticed it was empty. When I tried to steer the conversation back toward us, he would gently redirect it, always finding a way to make himself the center of her attention again. Afterward, in the kitchen, he pulled me aside and said something that still echoes in my head. "She's lovely, son, but a kindergarten teacher? I just want you to end up with someone who can keep up with your ambition." That comment planted a seed of doubt that took root fast. And that was always his method. Charm the woman first, then quietly convince me she was not good enough. 2 weeks later, Sophia told me my father had texted her directly. Something about wanting to check in and make sure she felt appreciated in the relationship. She showed me the messages, and my hands went cold reading them. They were not aggressive or obviously inappropriate, but there was something underneath them that felt wrong. Something possessive disguised as concern. "I don't want to make things weird between you and your dad," Sophia told me, "but this feels like too much." I apologized for something I had not even fully understood yet. 3 days later, she ended things. She said she cared about me, but she could not handle the strange tension my father created every time we were together. I cried in my car for an hour after she left, not just because I had lost someone I actually loved, but because I finally saw the shape of the pattern clearly for the first time. My father was not being friendly. He was competing with me, and he had been winning for years. After Sophia left, I finally told my mother everything. She has been divorced from my dad for over a decade, and I thought she would understand immediately. Instead, she sighed and said the words I had heard my whole childhood. "That's just how your father is, sweetheart. He likes being liked." I wanted to scream. My mother had lived with this man for 18 years, and even after everything, she still found ways to explain away his behavior instead of naming it for what it actually was. I started paying closer attention after that, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every woman I dated got the same treatment. The lingering compliments, the sudden interest in her hobbies, the quiet comments meant to plant doubt in my head about whether she deserved someone like me. My last 3 relationships before Sophia had all ended the same way. Women confused and worn down by a dynamic they never signed up for, slowly fading out of my life, rather than dealing with my father's constant presence in it. What made it worse was watching him do this while building a public image as some kind of family values expert. He preached loyalty and respect on his podcast, told his listeners how to treat the people they loved, while quietly undermining every relationship his own son tried to build. My stepmother, Vanessa, adored him completely and had no idea any of this was happening. She thought he was simply a warm, generous man who loved his family. I envied how little she seemed to see. I reached a breaking point one night after my father called to casually mention he had run into Sophia at a coffee shop, just to see how she was doing, he said. That sentence alone told me everything. He was still reaching for her weeks after the breakup he had caused. I sat in my apartment furious, humiliated, and completely out of ideas for how to stop something that had been happening for almost a decade of my adult life. That is when I called my old college roommate, Maya. We had lived down the hall from each other for 4 years, stayed close ever since, and she was easily the sharpest, most fearless person I knew. She worked as a paralegal now, the kind of person who could read a room in seconds and never let anyone talk over her. I explained everything, the pattern, Sophia, the texts, my mother's dismissiveness, all of it pouring out at once. Maya went quiet for a long moment, then said something that changed everything. What if we let him try it with someone who actually sees him coming? Her idea was simple on the surface. She would pretend to be my girlfriend, someone confident enough to handle my father's tactics without getting flattered or intimidated, someone who could expose the pattern instead of falling for it. I hesitated at first. It felt manipulative, maybe even a little cruel. But then I thought about Sophia crying in her car, about every woman before her, about years of watching my own father sabotage the one thing I wanted most. I told Maya yes. We spent an entire weekend building our story. We had reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding, started talking again, and things had moved quickly over the past 2 months. Maya would be warm, but never desperate for approval, interested in my father's opinions without ever seeking them. The goal, she explained, is to make him feel like he could have my attention if he tried hard enough. That is exactly what makes men like him lose all control. It sounded terrible. It also sounded like the only plan that might actually work. 2 weeks later, I brought Maya to Sunday dinner. My father opened the door wearing a shirt I had never seen before, clearly chosen for the occasion, and the second his eyes landed on her, I watched something familiar ignite behind them. "You must be Maya," he said, holding her hand a beat too long. "Ryan has told me absolutely nothing about you, which honestly feels like a crime." Maya smiled back, easy and unbothered, and said it was nice to finally meet the man behind all the stories. Within minutes, my father was fully absorbed, asking about her work, her ambitions, laughing louder than necessary at things that were only mildly funny. He complimented her intelligence, her presence, the confidence she carried into a room. My mother would have called it charm. I called it exactly what it was. Vanessa sat quietly through most of dinner, occasionally trying to join the conversation before being gently steered out of it by her own husband. I felt a strange pang of guilt watching her, another woman standing slightly outside my father's spotlight, without understanding why. Maya, true to our plan, gave him just enough attention to keep him interested without ever making him feel secure. She would ask a thoughtful question, then turn and include me in her answer, always pulling the focus back toward us as a couple. By the end of the night, my father hugged Maya goodbye and told her she was welcome any time. "She more than likes me," he said proudly after Maya left, clearly convinced he had made an unforgettable impression. Over the following weeks, exactly like before, the private messages started. Nothing overtly inappropriate at first, just check-ins, shared articles, comments about how lucky I was to have found someone like her. Maya screenshotted every single one and sent them straight to me. "He's performing for me," she said one afternoon. "He wants me to think he's this thoughtful, generous man, so I'll eventually see him differently." It was unsettling watching it unfold exactly the way it always had with every girlfriend before her, except this time, someone was finally documenting it instead of quietly absorbing the damage. My father began finding excuses to show up wherever Maya might be, dropping by my apartment with food she had never asked for, mentioning events he thought she would enjoy attending together. Then came the phone call that confirmed everything. My father called me on a Thursday evening, his voice unusually shaky. "Ryan, I need to be honest with you about something," he said. "I think I've developed real feelings for Maya." My entire body went numb. "Dad, you've known her for 3 weeks," I said. "Sometimes that's all it takes when a connection is real," he replied, sounding almost proud of himself for admitting it. I hung up and called Maya immediately, my hands trembling as I repeated what he had said. She was quiet for a moment, then let out a laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. "Good," she said. "Now we finish this properly. Set up a family conversation this weekend. Tell him we want to talk everything through honestly." I didn't like the calculating tone in her voice, but I had come too far to stop now. That Saturday, my father arrived at my apartment dressed like he was heading somewhere far more important than his own son's living room. New shirt, expensive cologne, an energy in him I had not seen since his second wedding. Vanessa was not there. He had told her he was helping me with something at my place, which already told me he understood, somewhere beneath the surface, that whatever was about to happen needed to stay hidden from her. Maya arrived shortly after, calm and composed, greeting my father with a warmth that made my skin crawl knowing what was coming. We sat down in my living room, an uncomfortable triangle of chairs and tension. My father looked between us like he was trying to read exactly how this conversation would unfold in his favor. "So," he said finally, breaking the silence himself, "I think we all know why we're here." "We do," Maya agreed gently. "And Daniel, I want you to know how much I respect your honesty. It takes courage to say what you're feeling out loud." My father's chest visibly puffed up at that. "I was worried you'd think less of me for admitting it," he said. "Not at all," Maya replied. "Actually, I think this conversation has been a long time coming." She reached over and took my hand, and I watched confusion flicker briefly across my father's face before he pushed forward anyway. "The truth is," he said, leaning toward Maya, "I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment you walked through my door. You're intelligent, magnetic, everything I imagine a woman should be." Maya let him finish completely before responding, her voice steady and calm in a way that made the room feel colder. "Daniel, that means a lot coming from you," she said. "But there's something you need to know first. I'm not actually Ryan's girlfriend." My father blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "We've been friends since college," Maya continued. "Ryan asked me to help him because he was tired of watching you destroy every real relationship he tries to build. This entire thing was designed to show you exactly what you've been doing to him for years." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced in that apartment. "You've been lying to me," my father said, his voice rising with something between shock and fury. "You lied to yourself long before we did," I said, finally speaking up. "Dad, you've done this with every single woman I've dated since I was 18. You flirt with them, you text them behind my back, you make them feel guilty for choosing me instead of giving their attention to you. This wasn't about Maya, this was about finally making you see it." My father stood up abruptly, his face shifting through confusion, embarrassment, and then pure rage. "This is absurd," he said, his voice shaking. "I raised you better than this, and this is how you repay me. Staging some cruel trick to humiliate your own father." "No one made you say those things to Maya," I said. "No one made you text Sophia, or Emily, or Claire before her, or any of the women you decided to compete with me over. That was always you." He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, stopping only to turn back and deliver one final line. "You'll regret this, Ryan. Family doesn't do this to each other." Then he left, slamming the door hard enough that my downstairs neighbor banged on their ceiling in protest. Maya and I sat in silence for a long moment before she finally exhaled and said, "Well, that went about as expected." "Expected doesn't make it feel any better," I told her, my hands still shaking. For nearly 3 weeks after that night, my father did not contact me at all. No calls, no messages, nothing. Part of me hoped the silence meant he was finally reflecting on what he had done. I should have known better. My aunt called me one afternoon, her voice hesitant. "Ryan, honey, I think you should know what your father has been telling people." According to him, I had orchestrated some elaborate scheme to embarrass him publicly because I was jealous of how easily he connected with people. Jealous that he still had, in his words, more charisma left in him than I would ever have. He had taken the story to his podcast audience without naming names, framing himself as a father who had been cruelly humiliated by an ungrateful, insecure son. Comments poured in from strangers sympathizing with him, praising his vulnerability for sharing something so painful. Vanessa apparently believed every word of it. My own mother, who already knew his history better than anyone, still hesitated when I told her the full truth, asking if maybe I had taken things a little too far. I felt sick reading through it all, watching him twist an entire pattern of manipulation into a story where he was somehow the injured party. Maya reminded me of something important during one of my angrier phone calls to her. "He's doing exactly what he's always done," she said. "Rewriting the narrative so he never has to face what he actually caused. The only difference now is that people are finally starting to ask questions instead of just accepting whatever he tells them." And people did start asking questions. My cousin called a week later, confused about something in my father's version of events. "If Maya wasn't really your girlfriend," she asked, "why would your dad be embarrassed about flirting with her in the first place? Wouldn't that just be a funny misunderstanding instead of some devastating betrayal?" The logic of his own story had started falling apart under basic scrutiny, and slowly, quietly, family members who had defended him at first began circling back with harder questions he could not answer without admitting what he had actually done. Almost a year after that conversation in my living room, I met Claire through a coworker's dinner party. She was sharp, funny, and completely unimpressed by dramatic family stories, which honestly felt like exactly what I needed. I told her everything about my father early on, fully expecting her to run the way every other woman eventually had. Instead, she laughed and said it sounded like the plot of a soap opera nobody would believe, then asked when she could meet the man himself. When I finally introduced them 6 months later, my father tried his usual routine within the first 10 minutes. "Claire is stunning," he told me quietly. "Truly stunning." When he turned that same charm toward her directly, complimenting her career, her presence, asking probing personal questions clearly designed to draw her attention away from me, Claire simply redirected every single question straight back to our relationship. "That's such an interesting thought, Daniel," she said smoothly. "Ryan, what do you think about that?" By the end of dinner, my father looked genuinely frustrated for the first time in years, his tactics sliding off someone who simply refused to play along. He never fully stopped trying, not completely, but something about Claire's steadiness made it clear his usual approach would not work on her. The aggressive texting never started. The uninvited visits never happened. For the first time in my adult life, I had found someone completely immune to whatever version of charm my father tried to weaponize against my relationships. Claire and I got engaged last spring. When we told my family, my father's response was almost exactly what I expected. "Well, I suppose she's acceptable," he said. "Though I still think you're both rushing things." He has never once acknowledged what he did to Sophia, or to Maya, or to any of the women before them. In his mind, he remains the misunderstood father who was cruelly exposed by a bitter, jealous son, a story he still tells occasionally to sympathetic strangers who have no idea what actually happened in that living room. Here is the part that still unsettles me the most. At our engagement party last month, I watched my father corner one of Claire's bridesmaids near the drink table, complimenting her laugh, asking if she had ever considered modeling, leaning in just a little too close while Vanessa stood only a few feet away, oblivious as always. Some things, it seems, never actually change, no matter how clearly you expose them. I used to think confronting my father would fix something between us, that if I just made him see the pattern clearly enough, he would finally stop. He never did. What changed instead was me. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming, and I started choosing people who could not be manipulated by a man who has spent his entire life needing to be the most wanted person in every single room, even his own sons. Maybe that is the only ending someone like him is capable of giving you. Not a resolution, just a version of peace you build entirely on your own, while he stays exactly the same, still convinced, to this day, that he was never the problem at all.